considering this book was published in 1996 when Frasier was really still in its infancy as a show, at this point it was only about 3 years old, I wasn't necessarily expecting that much from this book. This is, well, the book's just called Frasier, subtitled The Official Companion Book to the Award-Winning Paramount Television Comedy, written and edited by Jefferson. And I don't know if this was ever published in America. This is actually listed as a Channel 4 book. I assume it probably was published overseas initially, actually, and then repurposed for the UK. But I have to say, this is fabulous and exceeded all of my expectations. Now, I am a die-hard Frasier fan, but I also love Cheers. Do I prefer Cheers to Frasier? I love them both for equal reasons. And I was thrilled to read that actually quite a lot of this starts off as an origin story, and we learn about, Cheers, and then there are mentions of Wings. I had never heard of Wings, and then I went on to watch Wings and fell completely in love with that. So thank you so much to this book for actually introducing that show to me, because it is fabulous. If you haven't seen it, Frasier and Lilith make a guest appearance, as do Norm, Cliff, and very briefly Rebecca. And then obviously the book goes into Frasier and how the show came about after Cheers, or during Cheers really, because the decision was made before the final episode aired. And it's quite an interesting thing, because initially apparently Kelsey Grammer didn't really want to continue with Frasier. He'd obviously played this character for a very long time. Maybe he wanted to sink his teeth into something else, and of course I believe he would be fabulous at whatever he turned his hand to. But the show obviously eventually did get the go-ahead, and I just have to thank David Angle, Peter Casey, and David Lee for this absolutely beautiful creation, because Frasier is one of the very few shows that makes me laugh raucously. I will be honest, I'm an intellectual snob. The style of humor appeals to me so much, but then I also love the easier, more casual humor that we get from Martin, and often some of his jokes or punchlines or mannerisms are much, much more entertaining than anything Frasier or Niles could say. But that's an aside. Once the book kind of establishes the origin and we get going, we begin to learn. Well, first of all, we get to hear about the guest voices, which is pretty interesting. I had no idea Carrie Fisher did a guest voice. I don't know how I completely missed that, and I'm absolutely disgusted in myself. Then it looks at the characters, which is pretty interesting when it comes to the new characters. Obviously, Frasier is pretty interesting, but John Mahoney's one. Did you know that John Mahoney is English? Genuinely did not know that. He was born in Manchester. Absolutely gobsmacked. Loved reading about how he kind of almost accidentally became an actor, and what a beautiful accident that was. And each of the cast members, or the key cast members, have interviews with Jefferson Graham, and we really get to hear from their own mouth what they think of their characters, of the show, their highlights, what it's like working with Moose, who played Eddie. I'm pretty sure every single one of them was asked what it's like working with Moose, which, I mean, there's actually quite a sad thing in this. I can't remember, it was either John Mahoney or David Hyde Pierce who mentioned that Moose doesn't really act like a dog around anybody except his handler, Matilda. When he is around the cast members, he is rigid, basically. He doesn't wag his tail, he will never lick them, he won't bound around. And when you think of it like that, it's actually kind of sad. He didn't really have the life of a dog. So that's the only bit in this that I found unpleasant, because it was a, kind of an emotional thought. But let's face it, he's absolutely fantastic. And the star of the show, the real star. Then, as we approach the end, the cast interviews and things take up quite a good chunk. They're absolutely delightful to read. We get a kind of a week in the life of Frasier, where we're guided through what happens on a weekly basis with the show, obviously starting with the initial table reads, and then how the writers amend the scripts, the rehearsals, etc., then the live, the recording in front of a live audience. And as somebody who is very, obviously, fascinated by the behind the scenes of film and TV, that's something that I really enjoyed. I really thoroughly liked that aspect. And you know, for anybody who thinks that, and I'm not saying that you do, but for anybody who does think that, you know, people who are in sitcoms just turn up, record an episode, and leave, it's definitely a lot more intense than that. The book makes it sound exhausting, which is not surprising, of course. And then at the end, we have some scripts. Primarily, we have the script for The Good Son, which is obviously our first episode, and I think one that's always going to be a very emotional one, as it shows us Frasier transitioning from his life in Boston to his life in Seattle. It's an absolutely fantastic book. The page count, if you're interested, is just shy of 300. And as I said, given that the show was only 3 years old, I wasn't expecting the most detailed book. But there is so much in this. I absolutely adore it. If you're a fan of Frasier, you must read this. If you're a fan of Cheers but have never seen Frasier for whatever reason, I suggest you watch Frasier. I promise you will love it. But I also suggest you read at least the first bit of this, because there's a lot of really interesting information about the production and some of the people involved. I truly adored it, and I will probably read it again at some point. Frasier by Jefferson Graham is an absolutely delightful read.